Captain Elena Vasquez stared at the massive holographic display showing the Galactic Council chamber, her weathered hands gripping the armrests of her command chair. The ornate amphitheater stretched endlessly before her, filled with thousands of alien delegates representing civilizations that had existed long before humanity had even discovered fire. The sight should have been overwhelming, but Elena felt only a cold determination settling in her chest. Incoming transmission from Council Prime Zarathan, announced Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun from the communications station. They're requesting our response to the ultimatum. Elena's jaw tightened. Ultimatum was putting it mildly. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council had delivered what they called an invitation to humanity. Join their collective as a subordinate species, surrender all military assets, relocate to designated agricultural worlds, and accept the role of food producers for the greater galactic civilization. The alternative, they had made abundantly clear, was extinction. The Council believed they were being generous. After all, they had offered humanity a chance to survive, which was more than they had given the Ketheri, the Morganites, or the dozen other species that had been systematically eliminated over the past millennium. Those civilizations had been deemed incompatible with galactic harmony. Humanity, at least, had agricultural potential. Put them through, Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the weight of what was about to unfold. The main screen shimmered, revealing the imposing figure of Council Prime Zarathan, a towering insectoid being whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed with an oily rainbow sheen. Multiple compound eyes regarded Elena with what she had learned to recognize as smug superiority. Behind him, the council chamber buzzed with activity as hundreds of species went about their daily business of managing an empire that spanned half the galaxy. Captain Vasquez of the human delegation, Zarathan's voice emerged from his translation device in clipped, mechanical tones. 3 of your solar rotations have passed since our generous offer was extended to your species. The council requires your answer. Elena felt the eyes of her crew upon her. Every human on the bridge knew that this moment would define the future of their species. In the weeks leading up to this confrontation, Earth's greatest minds had worked tirelessly to find alternatives. The mathematicians had run probability matrices. The physicists had explored theoretical weapons. The diplomats had crafted elegant speeches about cooperation and mutual benefit. But Elena knew what the council didn't suspect. Humanity had one advantage that none of the previous civilizations had possessed. They had learned to lie with conviction, to project weakness while harboring strength, and, most importantly, they had mastered the art of seeming to comply while preparing to resist. Council Prime, Elena began, her voice carrying across space to the assembled aliens. Humanity has considered your offer carefully. We have consulted with our leaders, our scientists, our people. We understand the position you have placed us in. Zarathan's antennae twitched with satisfaction. Around the council chamber, other delegates turned their attention to the human transmission. This was always the interesting part, watching a species accept their place in the greater order. Some begged, some raged, some tried to negotiate. But they all ultimately bent the knee. Your wisdom in accepting the natural order is commendable, Zarathan replied. Your species will find purpose and service to the greater galactic community. The agricultural worlds we have selected will provide adequate living space for your population, and our genetic modification programs will ensure your descendants are better suited for their roles. Elena's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed the captain's knuckles had gone white. The genetic modification programs were another term for selective breeding and neural conditioning, turning humans into docile farmers who would never again dream of the stars. We have prepared transportation vessels, Zarathan continued, and our oversight teams are ready to begin the relocation process. Your military vessels will be scrapped, of course, and your leadership structure dissolved. The transition will be gradual but thorough. The Council Prime paused, his compound eyes glittering. However, we recognize that your species may need time to adjust to these new realities. As a gesture of goodwill, We are prepared to allow some of your people to witness our benevolence firsthand before the full relocation begins. Perhaps a delegation could visit our core worlds to see the prosperity that comes from cooperation. Elena almost smiled at that. The goodwill gesture was actually standard council procedure. Take the leaders and intellectuals on a tour of their vast empire. Show them the impossible scale of galactic civilization. Demonstrate the futility of resistance. It was psychological warfare disguised as diplomacy. But the council had made a crucial error. They assumed that humans, like every other species they had encountered, would be awed into submission by their power. They had never encountered a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare, of turning apparent weakness into devastating strength. That is a generous offer, Elena replied carefully. However, before we proceed with any arrangements, I need clarification on one point. The Council's authority over newly integrated species. What exactly does that entail? Zarathan's head tilted slightly. A gesture Elena had learned indicated mild confusion. Your question lacks specificity, Captain. Our authority is absolute, as it must be for the maintenance of galactic order. All aspects of your civilization will fall under Council oversight. Resource allocation, population management, technological development, cultural preservation where appropriate. I see, Elena said slowly. And this authority, it extends to all human activities? All human decisions? Naturally, Zarathan confirmed. Your species will be guided by those with greater wisdom and experience in galactic affairs. This is not a negotiation, Captain. This is an explanation of how your integration will proceed. Elena nodded thoughtfully, as if processing this information for the first time. In reality, she was running through the final preparations in her mind. Hidden throughout human space, thousands of ships waited in carefully mapped positions. Not the massive dreadnoughts that the Council expected. Those have been conspicuously displayed during their initial negotiations, allowing the aliens to catalog and prepare counters for humanity's obvious military strength. No, the ships that mattered were smaller, faster, and completely invisible to Council sensors. Humanity had spent decades perfecting stealth technology, not for space warfare as the aliens understood it, but for something far more audacious. Council Prime, Elena said, her voice taking on a tone of resigned acceptance. I believe I understand the situation fully now. Humanity will provide its answer to the Council's generous offer. Zarathan's satisfaction was palpable. Around the Council chamber, delegates began to settle in for the formal submission ceremony. Some were already making notes about agricultural quotas and genetic modification schedules. The humans would join the long list of civilizations that had learned to accept their place in the galactic order. Elena straightened in her chair, her hand moving to a simple control panel beside her armrest. The gesture appeared casual, even defeated, but every human on the bridge recognized the significance. She was activating a communications array that would simultaneously contact every hidden ship, every prepared team, every human who was waiting for this moment. The answer, Elena said clearly, her voice carrying across the Council chamber to thousands of alien ears, is quite simple, actually. She paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. In hidden positions throughout galactic space, human operatives received the signal and began moving toward objectives that the Council could never have imagined. Centuries of human military doctrine, refined through countless conflicts and adapted for asymmetric warfare, was about to be unleashed on an empire that had never faced an enemy willing to think beyond conventional space combat. Zarathan leaned forward expectantly, ready to begin the formal integration procedures. The other Council members prepared to add humanity to their catalog of subordinate species. None of them suspected that they were about to learn why humans had never quite fit the pattern of civilizations they had conquered before. Our answer, Elena continued, her voice steady and clear, our complete and total response to your ultimatum. In the communication centers throughout human space, operators held their breath. On distant worlds, human colonists made final preparations for what was to come. Aboard thousands of hidden ships, crews checked their equipment one last time. Elena looked directly into the camera, speaking not just to the Council, but to every human who would hear this transmission for generations to come. Her voice carried the weight of humanity's entire history. Every war, every struggle, every moment when their species had chosen to fight rather than surrender. Run! The word seemed to hang in the air for a moment, its simplicity almost anticlimactic after so much buildup. Zarathan's compound eyes blinked in sequence, his translation device struggling to process not just the word but its context. "I do not understand," Zarathan said slowly. "You are instructing us to run? This is not a proper response to integration protocols." Elena's expression hardened, and, for the first time, the aliens in the council chamber saw something that sent an unexpected chill through their collective consciousness. They saw a human who was no longer pretending to be afraid. "Council Prime," Elena said with deadly calm, "you have spent thousands of years conquering civilizations that fought you with honor, species that met your fleets in open battle and tried to match your superior technology with their own inferior weapons. You've grown accustomed to enemies who play by your rules." Sarah Chen's fingers flew across her console, confirming that the signal had been received and acknowledged across human space. Every hidden asset was now in motion. The carefully orchestrated plan that had taken months to prepare was beginning to unfold. "You made one critical error," Elena continued. "You assumed the humans would be like all the others. You cataloged our obvious military assets, studied our conventional weapons, prepared counter-strategies for the kind of warfare you understand. But you never asked yourselves the most important question." Zarathan was beginning to show signs of agitation, his antennae twitching rapidly. Around the council chamber, other delegates were turning their attention fully to the human transmission, sensing that something was going wrong with what should have been a routine submission. "What question?" Zarathan demanded. Elena's smile was predatory. "What do you do when your enemy doesn't want to fight your ships?" She leaned forward slightly. "What do you do when they want to fight your empire?" The implications of her words were beginning to sink in across the council chamber. Species that had existed for millennia, civilizations that had seen the rise and fall of countless worlds, were starting to feel an emotion they had almost forgotten: uncertainty. "You see, Council Prime," Elena explained conversationally, "while you were cataloging our dreadnoughts and analyzing our plasma cannons, we were studying you. Not your technology. We already knew we couldn't match that. We were studying your civilization, your logistics, your infrastructure, your dependencies." Across galactic space, the first phase of humanity's response was already underway. Ships that had appeared to be simple cargo haulers suddenly activated drives that pushed them to velocities the Council had never recorded. Their destinations were not military targets, but something far more vulnerable: the vast network of automated systems that kept galactic civilization functioning. "You built an empire spanning half the galaxy," Elena continued, her voice taking on an almost professorial tone. "But empires that large can't function without perfect coordination. Every world depends on shipments from dozens of others. Every system relies on automated traffic control, resource allocation algorithms, communication networks." The realization was beginning to spread through the council chamber like a virus. These humans weren't planning a conventional military response. They were targeting the invisible skeleton that held galactic civilization together. "And the beautiful thing about automated systems," Elena said with genuine admiration, "is that they're designed to be efficient, not secure. After all, who would be foolish enough to attack infrastructure instead of military targets? What species would be crazy enough to try to break an empire instead of fighting its armies?" Zarathan's voice had taken on a tone of growing panic. "What are you doing? What have you done?" Elena's expression was almost sympathetic. "We're doing what humans have always done when faced with a superior enemy, Council Prime. We're refusing to fight fair." She gestured to the view screen showing the council chamber. "Right now, Approximately 7,000 human operatives are beginning to introduce carefully crafted chaos into your systems. Nothing dramatic, just tiny errors in shipping schedules, minor glitches in traffic control, small delays in communication relays. The true horror of humanity's strategy was becoming clear. They weren't planning to destroy the Galactic Empire in a single decisive battle. They were planning to make it collapse under its own weight. You have 48 hours to begin evacuating non-essential personnel from your core worlds, Elena announced formally. After that, we can't guarantee the stability of your supply chains, your transportation networks, or your communication systems. The larger your civilization, the harder it falls, and you've built the largest civilization in galactic history. As alarms began sounding throughout the council chamber and emergency protocols activated across galactic space, Elena Vasquez sat back in her command chair and watched an empire realize that it had just made a terrible mistake. Humanity had given their answer, and the galaxy was about to learn why you should be very careful before you threaten a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare. The real question now was whether the Council would be wise enough to take humanity's advice, whether they would run. Admiral Kethvar of the Council Defense Fleet stood in the primary command center of Nexus Station, the massive orbital fortress that served as the military heart of the Galactic Council. Banks of holographic displays surrounded him, each one showing increasingly disturbing reports from across Council space. What had begun as minor system anomalies 12 hours ago was rapidly escalating into something that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. Status report. He commanded, his 4 arms working independently across multiple control surfaces. Kethvar had commanded fleets in 18 major campaigns, had overseen the integration of 47 species, and had never encountered an enemy that couldn't be defeated through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. But this was different. Sir, reported Commander Vextai, her scaled features showing the strain of the past several hours. We're tracking system failures across 14 sectors. Transportation grid efficiency is down 38% and falling. 3 major shipping routes have been completely disrupted. Kethvar's primary eyes focused on the tactical display, while his secondary eyes monitored the flood of incoming reports. The pattern made no sense according to any military doctrine he knew. The humans weren't attacking military installations, weren't engaging council fleets, weren't even targeting population centers. Instead, they seemed to be systematically undermining the invisible infrastructure that held galactic civilization together. What about their fleet movements? He asked. Where are their main battle groups? Vextai's hesitation was telling. Sir, we can't locate any significant human military concentrations. Our sensor networks show scattered small craft throughout council space, but nothing larger than escort-class vessels. It's as if their entire military has simply dispersed. That was impossible. Kethvar had personally reviewed the intelligence reports on human military capabilities. They possessed approximately 800 major warships, including 12 dreadnought-class vessels that could pose a genuine threat to Council forces. Those ships had to be somewhere. Admiral, interrupted another officer. We're receiving reports of infrastructure failures from the Centauri trade hub. Their entire cargo sorting system has crashed, and there are over 10,000 freighters backed up in the shipping lanes. Before Kethvar could respond, another voice called out, Sir, the communication relay at Epsilon Eridani is reporting massive delays. Message traffic is backing up throughout the sector. Then, another. Transport scheduling errors at the Vega Junction. Passenger liners are being routed to wrong destinations. The reports kept coming, each one describing a different type of system failure, but all following the same pattern. Critical infrastructure suddenly, developing problems that shouldn't exist. Kethvar was beginning to realize that the humans had somehow identified the weak points in galactic civilization itself. Give me a direct line to Council Prime Zarathan, he ordered. Minutes later, Zarathan's image appeared on the main screen, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. Behind him, The council chamber was in chaos as delegates received reports from their home systems. "Admiral," Zarathan said without preamble, "please tell me you have located the human military forces and developed a strategy to neutralize this assault." Kethvar found himself in the uncomfortable position of admitting tactical confusion. "Council Prime, we are dealing with an enemy that has deliberately chosen not to engage our military. They appear to be conducting some form of infrastructure warfare on a scale we have never encountered." Infrastructure warfare? Zarathan's antennae twitched in agitation. "Explain." "They're attacking the systems that keep our civilization functioning," Kethvar replied, his own disbelief evident in his voice. "Transportation scheduling, communication routing, cargo handling, resource allocation, all the automated processes that we rely on to manage an empire of this size." Zarathan was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Like most council leaders, he had grown up in a civilization where infrastructure was essentially invisible. It simply worked, had always worked, and was maintained by vast automated systems that required minimal oversight. The idea that someone might deliberately attack these systems seemed almost nonsensical. "How is this possible?" Zarathan asked finally. "Our systems are protected by multiple layers of security protocols." "That's what we're trying to determine," Kethvar admitted. "Initial analysis suggests they're not breaking our security so much as exploiting our efficiency. Our systems are designed to handle massive volumes of legitimate traffic with minimal verification delays. The humans appear to have found ways to introduce subtle errors that cascade into major disruptions. On dozens of worlds throughout Council space, the effects of humanity's strategy were becoming increasingly visible. On Proxima Tertius, a major agricultural world, automated harvesting equipment had received scheduling updates that sent entire fleets of farming machines to empty fields while leaving ready crops unharvested. The error would be corrected within hours, but the delay would create shortages throughout the supply chain. At the Rigel Industrial Complex, manufacturing schedules have been quietly adjusted, causing assembly lines to receive components in the wrong sequence. Nothing was damaged, no sabotage could be proven, but production efficiency dropped by 60% as workers scrambled to sort out the confusion. Meanwhile, in the Sirius system, traffic control computers had developed a peculiar glitch that caused incoming cargo ships to be assigned docking coordinates that were already occupied, creating a massive traffic jam that would take days to untangle. Each incident, taken individually, was minor. The kind of technical glitch that might happen naturally in any complex system. But occurring simultaneously across hundreds of worlds, they created a cascade effect that was bringing galactic commerce to a grinding halt. "Admiral," Vextai reported, "we're getting confirmation of similar incidents in 37 additional sectors. Pattern analysis suggests the humans have somehow gained access to our primary logistics networks." Kethvar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. In all his years of military service, he had never faced an enemy that seemed to understand the vulnerabilities of galactic civilization better than the civilization itself. The humans had identified dependencies that even Council strategists had never fully mapped. "What about our response capabilities?" Zarathan asked. "Can we trace these attacks back to their sources?" "That's the problem, Council Prime," Kethvar replied. "The humans aren't actually attacking anything in a conventional sense. They're sending legitimate traffic through our networks, but traffic that contains subtle instructions designed to cause system conflicts. By the time we identify the source of a problem, the original signal has long since disappeared into the normal data flow." It was, Kethvar realized, a form of warfare that was almost elegant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to destroy Council systems, the humans were making them destroy themselves. They had turned the Empire's greatest strength, its vast, interconnected infrastructure, into its greatest weakness. "Sir," called another officer, "we're receiving reports that the humans have made another public broadcast." Kethvar nodded grimly. "Put it through." The main screen switched to show Captain Elena Vasquez once again, still seated in her command chair with the same calm confidence she had displayed during their ultimatum response. Behind her, human crew members worked at their stations with the focused intensity of people who knew they were making history. Council Prime, Admiral Kethvar, Elena said, somehow knowing exactly who would be watching. I trust you're beginning to understand the nature of our response to your generous integration offer. Zarathan's image appeared in a split screen beside Elena's. Captain, your actions constitute an act of war against the entire Galactic Council. You are disrupting the lives of trillions of beings. Elena's expression showed no hint of remorse. Council Prime, your ultimatum threatened the extinction of our entire species. Did you expect us to simply accept that quietly? Did you think we would go gently into agricultural servitude? Your resistance is futile, Kethvar interjected. You cannot sustain this kind of operation indefinitely. Eventually, our security systems will adapt, our technicians will correct these disruptions, and our fleets will locate your forces. Elena nodded dojehashfully. You're absolutely right, Admiral. Which is why we're not planning to sustain this operation indefinitely. She leaned forward slightly. We're planning to escalate it. The implications of that statement sent a chill through both military and civilian leadership throughout Council space. If this level of disruption was just the beginning, what do you mean escalate? Zarathan demanded. Well, Elena said conversationally, so far we've been focusing on minor inconveniences. Shipping delays, scheduling conflicts, communication lag. But we've also been mapping your systems during this process, identifying choke points and critical failure modes that could cause much more significant problems. She gestured to something off-screen. For example, we've discovered that the entire Andromeda sector depends on a single traffic control hub for coordinating resource shipments. Rather interesting design choice, very efficient under normal circumstances, but it creates a fascinating single point of failure. Kethvar felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. The Andromeda sector housed over 200 billion beings across 47 worlds. If its coordination hub failed, you wouldn't dare, Zarathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Council Prime, Elena replied with deadly seriousness. You threatened to exterminate my entire species. There is literally nothing we wouldn't dare at this point. She paused to let that sink in. However, we're not monsters. We don't want to harm innocent civilians any more than necessary to ensure our survival. Then what do you want? Zarathan asked. Elena's answer was simple and direct. We want you to leave us alone. Completely. Forever. Withdraw your fleets from human space. Abandon any plans for our integration. And officially recognize humanity as an independent civilization with full sovereignty over our territory. Impossible, Kethvar replied immediately. The Council cannot allow an unintegrated species to remain independent. It sets a precedent that could destabilize the entire galactic order. Elena smiled, and, once again, both alien leaders felt that uncomfortable chill. Admiral, with respect, your galactic order is already destabilized. The question is whether you want us to destabilize it further, or whether you'd prefer to adapt to a new reality. Across Council space, the effects of human interference were continuing to compound. What had started as minor delays was becoming major disruptions as the Empire's just-in-time logistics network struggled to compensate for the cascading errors. Food shipments were being delayed, industrial production was grinding to a halt, and communication networks were becoming increasingly unreliable. Even if we were inclined to consider your demands, Zarathan said carefully, how can we trust that you would cease these attacks? How do we know you won't continue to threaten galactic stability? Because Council Prime, Elena explained patiently, we don't want to run a galactic empire. We never did. We just want to be left alone to develop our civilization in our own way. Give us that, and you'll never hear from us again. Refuse. She shrugged. Well, you're already seeing what happens when you refuse. Kethvar studied the tactical displays, running calculations in his head. The Council military could eventually adapt to human tactics, could develop countermeasures and security protocols to prevent this kind of infrastructure warfare. But eventually might be months or even years, and the economic and social damage would be catastrophic. There's another option, he said slowly. We could simply evacuate our populations from the affected sectors, isolate the human regions of space, and contain the damage. Elena shook her head. Admiral, you're still thinking like a conventional military commander. You assume that our capabilities are limited to the regions where you know we have a presence. Her smile widened slightly. That assumption might be incorrect. The statement hung in the air like a threat and a promise combined. Were the humans implying they had assets throughout Council space? Had they somehow infiltrated the galactic infrastructure on a scale that the Council had never detected? Sir, Vextai called urgently. We're receiving reports of system anomalies in the core worlds. The Galactic Banking Network is reporting transaction processing delays. Kethvar felt the bottom drop out of his universe. The core worlds were supposed to be the most secure regions in Council space, protected by layers of redundant security systems and constantly monitored by the most advanced surveillance networks in the galaxy. If the humans had somehow reached into the core worlds themselves. Elena watched their expressions with satisfaction. Gentlemen, humanity has been preparing for this moment for longer than you realize. We've been studying your civilization, learning your weaknesses, and positioning our assets for decades. What you're seeing now is just the opening move in a game we've been planning for a very long time. The truth was both simpler and more complex than what Elena was implying. Humanity hadn't infiltrated galactic infrastructure through some vast spy network. Instead, they had done something much more subtle and far more dangerous. They had learned to think like the infrastructure itself. Human computer specialists had spent years studying the patterns of galactic data traffic, learning to mimic the signatures of legitimate system communications. They didn't need to hack Council computers. They could simply send them instructions that looked like routine updates from authorized sources. The Empire's own efficiency protocols did the rest, spreading the carefully crafted chaos throughout the network without anyone realizing what was happening. Council Prime, Elena said formally, you have 6 hours to begin withdrawing your forces from human space and publicly announcing humanity's sovereign status. After that, we'll begin Phase 2 of our response, which will involve significantly more serious infrastructure disruptions. The choice is yours. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar and Zarathan to stare at the blank screen and contemplate an impossible situation. They were facing an enemy that refused to fight by any rules they understood, that turned their own strengths against them, and that seemed to have capabilities they couldn't even properly assess. For the first time in galactic history, the Council was learning what it felt like to be afraid of a species they had underestimated. And somewhere in the depths of space, Elena Vasquez was counting down the hours until humanity would show them exactly how much they had underestimated. Dr. Sarah Chun floated in the zero-gravity command center of the cloaked vessel Prometheus, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that displayed the most complex data analysis humanity had ever attempted. Around her, dozens of specialists worked in focused silence, monitoring the cascade of system failures spreading throughout galactic civilization like a precisely engineered virus. Status report on the core worlds, she called to her primary analyst. Banking networks are experiencing 37% processing delays, Lieutenant Commander Martinez replied, his voice tight with concentration. Transport scheduling in the Sol Centauri region is completely scrambled, and the Galactic Communication Hub is showing signs of cascade overflow. They're about to hit critical saturation. Sarah nodded grimly. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as modeled, but the reality of watching an entire galactic civilization begin to buckle under its own weight was more sobering than she had anticipated. Each number on her displays represented millions of beings whose daily lives were being disrupted, whose carefully ordered existence was dissolving into chaos. But then, she remembered the Council's ultimatum, the casual way they had discussed genetic modification programs and agricultural relocation. The complete absence of any consideration for human autonomy, human culture, human survival as anything more than useful animals. Whatever guilt she might feel about the current disruption, it paled beside the alternative they had been offered. Incoming transmission from Admiral Kethvar, her communications officer announced. Sarah authorized the connection, and the familiar image of the Council's military commander appeared on her main screen. Kethvar looked haggard, his usually pristine uniform showing signs of the stress he had been under for the past 18 hours. "Dr. Chun," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I'm calling to discuss terms for ceasing this unprecedented assault on galactic infrastructure." "Admiral," Sarah replied calmly, "I believe Captain Vasquez made our terms quite clear. Complete recognition of human sovereignty and withdrawal from human space. Have you come to accept those conditions?" Kethvar's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. The Council was feeling the pressure, but they weren't ready to capitulate yet. They were still hoping to find some middle ground that would allow them to maintain their authority while stopping the hemorrhaging of their civilization. "The Council is prepared to offer significant concessions," Kethvar said carefully. "Enhanced autonomy within the Council framework, dedicated human sectors with minimal oversight, preservation of human cultural practices." Sarah shook her head before he could finish. "Admiral, I think you're still misunderstanding our position. We're not negotiating for better terms of slavery. We're demanding complete independence. Nothing less will stop what's currently happening to your empire." "You don't understand the implications," Kethvar pressed. "If we grant independence to humanity, other species will demand the same. The galactic order that has maintained peace for millennia will collapse." "Your galactic order," Sarah corrected, "was built on the subjugation of countless civilizations. If it can only survive by denying freedom to others, then perhaps it deserves to collapse." Through her displays, Sarah could see the real-time effects of humanity's strategy. The galactic banking network was approaching critical failure as transaction processing delays compounded into system-wide bottlenecks. Shipping throughout the empire had slowed to a crawl as automated routing systems struggled with constantly changing data. Communication networks were degrading as traffic overload created cascading failures. Most critically, the resource allocation systems that fed the core worlds were beginning to break down. The planets at the heart of Council civilization depended on precisely timed deliveries of food, raw materials, and manufactured goods from hundreds of tributary worlds. As the logistics network fractured, those deliveries were becoming increasingly unreliable. "Dr. Chun," Kethvar said with growing desperation, "you are threatening the lives of trillions of innocent beings. The core world alone houses over 500 billion Council citizens. If the supply chains completely collapse, then you should probably accept our terms quickly," Sarah replied without sympathy. "Every hour you delay increases the damage to your infrastructure. Every day you refuse to recognize our independence brings your civilization closer to systemic collapse." What the Admiral didn't know, what the Council couldn't know, was that humanity's capabilities extended far beyond what they had already demonstrated. The current disruptions were carefully controlled, designed to cause maximum inconvenience with minimal actual harm. But Dr. Chin's team had identified critical vulnerabilities that could cause catastrophic damage if pushed too far. The orbital habitat life support networks, for instance, relied on automated systems that could be convinced to shut down for maintenance at precisely the wrong times. The interstellar navigation beacons that guided ships through hyperspace could be made to broadcast slightly incorrect coordinates, causing vessels to arrive days or weeks off course. Most terrifyingly, the automated defense grids protecting major worlds could potentially be turned against the populations they were meant to defend. Humanity had no intention of actually implementing these more destructive options. But the Council didn't know that, and the psychological pressure of knowing their enemies possessed such capabilities was almost as effective as actually using them. "There may be another solution," Kethvar said slowly. "What if we were to establish a buffer zone around human space? A region where Council authority is limited? This would provide you with the autonomy you seek while maintaining the broader galactic framework. Sarah could see the appeal of such a compromise from the Council's perspective. It would allow them to save face while giving humanity most of what they wanted. But it would also leave the door open for future interference, future attempts to gradually erode human independence. And, more fundamentally, it would still leave the Council free to threaten other species in the same way they had threatened humanity. "Admiral," she said firmly, "the problem isn't that you threaten humanity. The problem is that you're a galactic empire built on the systematic oppression of other civilizations. As long as that empire exists, as long as you maintain the power to casually decide the fate of entire species, you remain a threat not just to us, but to every free-thinking being in the galaxy." The implications of her statement were beginning to sink in. Humanity wasn't just demanding independence for themselves. They were positioning themselves as champions of galactic freedom, opponents of the entire Council system. "You're talking about revolution," HFY said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're talking about liberation," Sarah corrected. "The Council has ruled through fear and superior technology for thousands of years. But your greatest strength has become your greatest weakness. The larger your empire grew, the more complex your infrastructure became, the more vulnerable you made yourselves to exactly the kind of attack we're conducting across the galaxy." Her words were being proven correct by the minute. The Vega industrial complex had shut down completely after its resource allocation computers became convinced that every raw material shipment was contaminated and required extensive decontamination procedures that didn't actually exist. The Centauri Agricultural Collective was experiencing massive crop failures as automated farming equipment received conflicting instructions about planting schedules and irrigation timing. Meanwhile, civilian populations throughout Council space were beginning to experience shortages of basic necessities as the breakdown in logistics made it impossible to maintain normal distribution networks. Food was becoming scarce in some regions, while rotting in warehouses in others. Medical supplies were being shipped to worlds that didn't need them, while hospitals elsewhere ran dangerously low on critical medications. "The situation is becoming untenable," HFY admitted. "But even if the Council were willing to consider your demands, the implementation would be complex. We cannot simply withdraw from human space overnight without creating additional disruptions." Sarah nodded understanding. "We recognize the practical challenges, Admiral. We're prepared to allow a reasonable transition period for the withdrawal of Council forces and the establishment of formal boundaries. What we won't accept is any attempt to use those practical challenges as an excuse for delay or renegotiation." "Dr. Chun," came another voice, as Council Prime Zarathan joined the transmission. "I must ask you to consider the broader implications of your actions. The Galactic Council has maintained peace and stability for over 2 millennia. Whatever flaws you perceive in our system, the alternative could be chaos on an unimaginable scale." Sarah had been expecting this argument. It was the same justification that every empire in human history had used to maintain their power, the claim that their oppression was necessary to prevent something worse. "Council Prime," she replied, "your peace and stability were purchased with the freedom of countless civilizations. You've created order by eliminating anyone who might disturb that order. But true stability can't be built on oppression. It has to come from cooperation between free and equal partners." "Idealistic nonsense," Zarathan retorted. "Without central authority, without unified command, galactic civilization will fragment into competing factions. There will be wars, territorial disputes, resource conflicts." "There will be freedom," Sarah interrupted. "The freedom for civilizations to make their own choices, even if those choices lead to conflict. The freedom to succeed or fail based on their own decisions rather than your edicts." She gestured to her displays, which showed the continuing cascade of failures throughout Council space. "You want to talk about stability? Your empire is collapsing around you because you built it to be so rigidly controlled that a few humans with computers could bring the whole thing down. That's not stability. That's brittleness masquerading as strength." The truth was that Sarah and Her team were walking a careful line. They needed to cause enough damage to force the Council to negotiate, but not so much that they triggered a complete civilizational collapse that would harm innocents throughout the galaxy. It was a delicate balance, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment as the effects of their actions rippled through the interconnected systems of galactic society. "What guarantees can you offer?" Zarathan asked. "That if we meet your demands, these attacks will cease entirely? How do we know you won't use these capabilities to make further demands in the future?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Trust was indeed the central issue here. The Council had to believe that humanity would honor any agreement, just as humanity had to believe that the Council wouldn't simply regroup and attack them again once the immediate crisis passed. "Council Prime," she said finally, "we can offer you the same guarantee you offered us. None. You'll have to trust that we'll keep our word, just as we would have had to trust that you wouldn't simply exterminate us after we submitted to your agricultural slavery program." "The difference," Zarathan replied hotly, "is that our word is backed by millennia of consistent governance. Your species has existed in galactic politics for less than a century." Sarah smiled grimly. "Our word is backed by the demonstrated capability to cripple your entire civilization without firing a shot. I'd say that's fairly solid collateral." The standoff continued, but Sarah could see the growing strain in the alien leader's expressions. Reports were flooding in from across Council space as the infrastructure failures mounted. The longer they delayed, the more damage accumulated, and the harder it would be to restore normal operations even after an agreement was reached. "Dr. Chun," Kethvar said finally, "what would immediate cessation of hostilities require? What are the minimum conditions that would stop the current attacks?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. "Simple, Admiral. Public announcement of human sovereignty, beginning of fleet withdrawal from human space, and formal recognition that the Council has no authority over human affairs. Make those announcements, and we'll immediately begin restoring your systems to normal operation." "And if we refuse?" Zarathan asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "Then, in approximately 4 hours, we begin Phase 3. And Phase 3 involves significantly more permanent damage to your infrastructure." She paused to let that sink in. "The choice, as always, is yours." As the transmission ended, Sarah turned back to her displays, watching the pulse of a galactic civilization in crisis. Humanity had rolled the dice on the largest gamble in their species' history. In the next few hours, they would discover whether they had correctly calculated the Council's breaking point, or whether they had just signed their own death warrant. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. Council Prime Zarathan stood in the emergency session chamber, his compound eyes surveying the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. In the 3 days since humanity had delivered their ultimatum, the situation had deteriorated beyond anything in recorded Council history. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber showed a cascade of failures spreading through every aspect of galactic society like a malignant virus. "Status report," he commanded, though he dreaded hearing the answer. Administrator Veltar, the Council's chief of logistics, approached the central podium with the bearing of someone delivering news of an incurable disease. "Council Prime, galactic commerce has decreased by 78%. Food distribution networks are operating at 32% efficiency. Industrial production has fallen to levels not seen since the pre-unification era." Zarathan's antennae drooped as the magnitude of the crisis became clear. "Casualties, no direct deaths attributable to human action," Veltar reported, "but 17 worlds have declared resource emergencies. Medical supply shortages are critical in 43 sectors. If current trends continue, we'll begin seeing actual famine within 2 weeks." The assembled delegates buzzed with agitation. Species that had enjoyed millennia of stability and prosperity were watching their civilizations crumble not through military defeat, but through something far more insidious: the simple breakdown of the systems that kept their society functioning. "What about our countermeasures?" asked Admiral Kethvar from his position at the military console. Have our technicians made any progress in isolating the human infiltration methods? Chief Technology Administrator Kixanael stepped forward, her crystalline form shimmering with what Zarathan had learned to recognize as distress. Admiral, we have identified several thousand instances of system compromise, but each incident appears to use different methodologies. The humans are not repeating their attack vectors. They're adapting faster than we could develop countermeasures. Furthermore, she continued, our analysis suggests that they possess detailed knowledge of our infrastructure that should have been impossible to acquire. They understand our systems better than many of our own technicians. This implies either massive infiltration over extended periods or analytical capabilities that exceed our models of human intelligence. Zarathan absorbed this information with growing unease. The Council had built their empire on the assumption of technological superiority, on the belief that their advanced civilization could overcome any challenge through superior knowledge and resources. But humanity had somehow turned that assumption on its head, using the Council's own sophistication against them. Council Prime, interrupted the delegate from the Centauri Collective, my constituents are demanding answers. How did a species we barely considered worth integrating manage to bring our entire civilization to the brink of collapse? It was a question that cut to the heart of everything the Council represented. For thousands of years, they had been the ultimate authority in galactic affairs, the unquestioned masters of spacefaring civilization. The idea that a relatively primitive species could challenge that authority was almost incomprehensible. The humans, Zarathan said slowly, appear to have capabilities we failed to properly assess. They have proven remarkably adaptable. Adaptable? The delegate's voice rose in pitch. Council Prime, they have systematically dismantled the infrastructure of galactic civilization without firing a single shot. This goes far beyond adaptability. Zarathan was spared from having to answer by the activation of the priority communication system. Captain Elena Vasquez appeared on the main screen, her image broadcast to every delegate in the chamber. She looked composed and professional, which somehow made her presence even more unsettling. Council Prime, Elena said formally, I trust you've had time to fully evaluate the situation. Are you prepared to discuss the terms of humanity's independence? Captain Vasquez, Zarathan replied, struggling to maintain his authority in front of the assembled delegates. Your actions have caused suffering throughout galactic civilization. Billions of beings are experiencing shortages of basic necessities because of your assault on our infrastructure. Elena's expression didn't change. Council Prime, you threatened to exterminate my entire species and turn the survivors into livestock. Did you expect us to simply accept that fate quietly? Every being suffering shortages today is alive because they're part of a civilization that chose oppression over cooperation. The delegate from the vegan consortium rose to speak. Captain, surely there must be some middle ground. The Council could offer enhanced autonomy, special status within the galactic framework. Elena turned her attention to the delegate, and Zarathan noticed something that sent a chill through his exoskeleton. The human captain looked genuinely sympathetic, almost sad, as she addressed the assembled representatives. Honored delegates, Elena said quietly, I understand your desire to find a compromise that preserves the existing order while addressing our concerns. But the existing order is built on the systematic oppression of free civilizations. As long as the Council maintains the power to dictate terms to sovereign species, it remains a threat to every thinking being in the galaxy. Admiral Keth Var stepped forward. Captain, even if we were to grant your demands for independence, how can we trust that humanity will cease these attacks? What guarantee do we have that you won't continue to hold galactic civilization hostage? Elena's response was immediate and firm. Admiral, we want nothing more than to return to our own space and be left alone to develop our civilization in peace. Give us that, and you'll never hear from us again. But attempt to reassert control over us, threaten us again, or try to use other species as proxies against us. She shrugged. Well, we've demonstrated our capabilities quite clearly. You're talking about holding the entire galaxy hostage, Zarathan accused. No, Elena corrected. We're talking about mutual deterrence. You don't threaten us. We don't destabilize your empire. It's a simple arrangement that should be easy to maintain as long as everyone honors their commitments. Through the chamber's displays, Zarathan could see real-time updates on the continuing crisis. The situation was approaching a point of no return. Several core worlds were reporting critical shortages, and social unrest was beginning in multiple sectors. The empire that had taken millennia to build was unraveling in a matter of days. Council Prime, Administrator Veltar called urgently. We're receiving reports of system failures in the core defense network. If those systems go down, the implication hung in the air like a death sentence. The core defense network protected the most vital worlds of galactic civilization, including the Council homeworlds themselves. If humanity could compromise those systems, they could potentially threaten the lives of hundreds of billions of beings. Elena's image on the screen showed no satisfaction at this development, only grim determination. Council Prime, the core defense network failures are not an attack. They're a demonstration. We want you to understand that your most critical systems are as vulnerable as your shipping networks. We could have taken those defenses offline permanently, but we chose to simply show you that we have that capability. This is madness, breathed the delegate from the Andromedan Assembly. You're threatening the fundamental security of galactic civilization. We're threatening the security of an empire built on oppression, Elena replied firmly. True galactic civilization, one based on cooperation between free and equal partners, would have nothing to fear from us. Zarathan found himself facing an impossible choice. Grant humanity's demands and risk the complete collapse of Council authority, or continue to resist and watch galactic civilization itself collapse under the weight of infrastructure failures. Either option meant the end of the world he had known. Captain, he said finally, what specific guarantees can you offer regarding the cessation of these attacks? What mechanisms would ensure that humanity honors any agreement? Elena's expression softened slightly. Council Prime, we can offer you the same guarantee that any sovereign civilization offers to its neighbors. Our word, backed by mutual interest in peace and prosperity. We have no desire to rule a galactic empire. We never wanted to be involved in galactic politics at all. We just want to be free to chart our own course. And if other species demand the same independence you're claiming for humanity? Admiral Kethvar asked. Elena's answer surprised everyone in the chamber. Then, you should give it to them. Any species intelligent enough to achieve spaceflight is intelligent enough to govern itself. The idea that some civilizations are naturally suited to rule while others are suited to serve is the foundational lie that your empire is built on. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Elena wasn't just demanding independence for humanity. She was articulating a vision of galactic civilization that was fundamentally incompatible with everything the Council represented. You're talking about the end of centralized galactic government, Zarathan said slowly. We're talking about the beginning of real galactic civilization, Elena replied. Imagine a galaxy where species cooperate because they choose to, not because they're forced to. Where trade happens between equals, where conflicts are resolved through negotiation rather than conquest, where every civilization is free to contribute its unique strengths to the greater good, and where chaos reigns, Admiral Kethvar interjected, where stronger species prey on weaker ones, where resources are fought over rather than allocated efficiently. Elena shook her head. Admiral, your efficient allocation system was built on the assumption that some species deserve more than others, that some civilizations have the right to dictate terms to others. That's not efficiency. That's institutionalized inequality. Through the Chamber's communication networks, reports continued to flood in from across galactic space. The situation was deteriorating by the hour, and Zarathan realized that regardless of the philosophical implications, He was rapidly running out of practical options. "Captain," he said formally, "if the Council were to recognize humanity's sovereignty and withdraw from human space, what timeline are we discussing for the restoration of normal galactic operations?" Elena's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it. "Council Prime, we can begin restoring critical systems within hours of a formal announcement. Full normalization would take approximately 2 weeks, depending on how quickly your technical teams can implement the corrections we provide. You would provide assistance in repairing the damage you've caused?" the delegate from the Tau Ceti Federation asked. "Of course," Elena replied. "We never wanted to cause permanent harm. Our goal was to demonstrate the consequences of threatening humanity, not to destroy galactic civilization. Help us secure our independence, and we'll help you rebuild." Zarathan looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of delegates who represented trillions of beings across half the galaxy. Some showed anger, others showed fear, but most showed simple exhaustion. The crisis had pushed everyone beyond their limits, forcing them to confront realities they had never imagined. "The Council will need time to deliberate," he announced finally. "Council Prime," Elena said with quiet urgency. "With respect, time is the one thing you don't have. Every hour you delay increases the damage to your infrastructure. Every day makes recovery more difficult. If you're going to accept our terms, you need to do it soon." She was right, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The cascading failures were approaching a point where they might become irreversible, where the damage to galactic civilization might be too severe to repair quickly even with human assistance. Zarathan made the decision that would echo through galactic history for millennia to come. "Captain Vasquez," he said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I hereby recognize the sovereign independence of humanity and all human-controlled territories. Council forces will begin immediate withdrawal from human space, and the Council renounces any claim to authority over human affairs." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs, but Zarathan continued. "In return, humanity will immediately cease all attacks on Council infrastructure and provide assistance in restoring normal galactic operations." Elena nodded solemnly. "Agreed, Council Prime. Dr. Chin's teams are already standing by to begin the restoration process. You should see improvements in critical systems within the next few hours." As the transmission ended and the immediate crisis began to wind down, Zarathan found himself contemplating a galaxy that would never be the same. Humanity had forced the Council to confront the contradictions at the heart of their empire, had proven that even the most powerful civilization could be vulnerable to an enemy that refused to play by conventional rules. More importantly, they had opened a door that could never be fully closed again. Other species throughout the galaxy had witnessed humanity's success, had seen that it was possible to resist Council authority and win. The empire that had ruled through fear and superior technology now faced a future where their subjects knew they were not invincible. Humanity had kept their promise, and within days, galactic infrastructure began returning to normal operation. But the galaxy itself had been permanently changed. The age of unquestioned Council authority was over, and the age of true galactic civilization, messy, chaotic, but genuinely free, had begun. And somewhere in human space, Elena Vasquez sat in her captain's chair and smiled, knowing that her species had not only secured their independence, but had given every thinking being in the galaxy something far more valuable: hope that freedom was possible, even against impossible odds. The Council had learned too late that when you threaten a species that has mastered the art of asymmetric warfare, you had better be prepared for the consequences. Humanity had given their one-word command, and the galaxy had learned to run, not in fear, but toward a future where every civilization could choose its own destiny. The revolution had begun with a single word, but it would reshape the stars themselves.